This event is presented by the Lloyd D. Levinson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality, and Tourism, School of Business, Stockton University, in partnership with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber and Stockton University Cannabis Studies Program.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just give us 1 second. We'll let everybody hop in, and we'll begin this afternoon's program. Appreciate you joining us. Seeing a lot of familiar faces. Margie, how are you? Chuck, I just saw you a couple hours ago on another one about the New Jersey incentive programs. Tom, Bill. Yeah, everybody's still connecting. Michael Santori. Max Slusher is on. Mr. Vitala, I just got off a call with him. Give it another minute before we get started. Appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. So used to doing these in the morning. We'll give it one more minute. It's funny, Chuck just sent me a message. So March 11th of last year was our last in-person event. We did a joint mixer with the Summers Point Business Association and the Cape May County Chamber of Commerce, and we have not had a live event since. And I remember sitting there in a room, Chuck just said to me, around this time we were debating whether we should have this event or not. And here we are. Limited to 10 people in the Atlantic City Convention Center, which is 500,000 square feet. All right. Looks like everybody's connected. We're going to get started with today's program. Greatly appreciate everybody joining us today. My name is Michael Chade. I'm the president of the Greater Atlantic City Chamber. We are thrilled to have such a great crowd today. The timing of this event probably couldn't be better from a virtual standpoint. So appreciate you taking some of your very, very busy time out to learn a little bit more from us. So, today's presentation, the Destination Cannabis, Insight for New Jersey Hospitality and Tourism, we're really going to focus on recreational cannabis, its impact on resort destinations, opportunities for New Jersey hospitality and tourism business. We're going to have some special focus will be given to destination marketing, the intersection of cannabis with agritourism and food and beverage tourism as well. The event is presented by the Lloyd Levinson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality, School of Business, Stockton University, and also with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber and Stockton University Cannabis Studies. So I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists. Stockton, the Light Institute really did a great job of putting this group together. So first we have Brian Applegarth. He is a founder of Cannabis Trail and chairperson of the Cal Travel Cannabis Committee. Brian is a cannabis tourism subject matter expert, educator, and international speaker on the topic. He's inspired by building bridges between the travel and cannabis industries and works to steward a model that goes beyond consumption. Brian believes that the California cannabis tourism experience must include culture, history, and storytelling of the medical cannabis movement. So welcome, Brian. We also have Rob, I'm going to mispronounce this, Mejia?
Mejia.
Yeah, there we go, Rob Mejia. He's an adjunct faculty cannabis studies minor at Stockton University, president of our community harvest, a cannabis education company. Rob is the author of multiple books written explicitly to introduce adults to cannabis and the cannabis industry. The Essential Cannabis Book, a field guide for the curious, and the Essential Cannabis Journal, personal notes from the field. It's from 2018-2019. Provides research information about how cannabis, with an authentic, engaging narrative and real-world examples that demystifies the plant, explains the science, and examines the stigma and social and racial justice issues surrounding cannabis. Expertise in cannabis extends to cooking with cannabis, as Rob has produced and hosted a number of edibles, events, and meals. So Rob, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time. Definitely very influential in helping us select the panel. We also have Cynthia Morales. She is the co-founder and director of education at Higher Ed Hemp Tours. Cynthia is the co-founder and director of the education for Higher Ed and Hemp Tours, Austin-based hemp advising company dedicated to bridging the gap in cannabis knowledge between consumer and retailers through unique experiences. Also, she is the ESL program director at ACES Language School, located in Austin, Texas. She's taught English as well as a variety of other subjects to both young and adult students from all over the world. So thank you so much for joining us today, Cynthia. And we also have Chef David, and I'm going to get this last name right because I wrote it down. It is Youssef Zadeh. Is it Youssef? You got to say it.
Youssef Zadeh.
Youssef Zadeh. Excuse me.
There you go. No worries. Thank you.
So David, Chef David, obviously a chef, food designer based in Boston, Massachusetts. He spent the majority of his career working in fine dining restaurants and hotels around the world. Mario Baltali, Richard Ekabus, is that how you pronounce his name? Ekabus?
That's correct.
Are just a few of the chefs that David has spent time with professionally. He's currently CEO and founder of Cloud Creamery, a cannabis ice cream company based in Boston. Chef David is diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2001, has been using cannabis to allow him to function in his everyday life. So Chef David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And of course, our moderator today, Amanda Hoover. Amanda is with NJ.com. She covers cannabis, or she's been very busy lately. And she is also with writes for NJ Cannabis Insider. She is an expert in this field and been covering it for how long have you been covering this now, Amanda?
In some capacity since about April 2019.
April 2019. So certainly a hot topic in New Jersey, certainly over the past year. So we are very grateful and very appreciative of our amazing panel today. Just a couple housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, put them in the chat room. Put them in the chat box. We'll get to them probably at the end of the session. If something is relevant, I'll bring it to their attention at that time, but most likely we'll address everything at the end. And then we'll have some closing comments from the Light Institute at the end of this session. So Amanda, without further ado, I want to turn this over to you. And thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks so much, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a huge week. This panel is coming just days after we finally have a legal cannabis law in New Jersey on Monday, after weeks of tense negotiations that had left the fate of cannabis kind of uncertain in New Jersey. Governor Phil Murphy signed 3 bills into law. Now, one of those will launch a legal marijuana industry that's years in the making at this point. The other 2 end arrests for possession of cannabis and also for underage possession and underage drinking, and replaces arrests with warnings. This is huge progress, both for the business world and in terms of criminal justice reform. But we still only have medical cannabis sales happening here in New Jersey. It could be months, it could be a year, some say, until dispensaries open for people who are 21 and older to be able to buy, and for people to come out of state and be able to buy in New Jersey. But there's still a lot to be thinking about right now, both for those who are interested in getting into the business and also for cities and towns that could see dispensaries open, that could see other opportunities come to them as well. And especially even for those that want to be in cannabis adjacent fields, doing things that don't touch the plant but are still involved in this industry. So I think what a lot of people are curious about, one of the first things that we're just going to get into is, under this new law, where are people going to be able to consume cannabis in New Jersey? Is this, Rob, I know you have followed this pretty closely. Do you want to take that question?
Oh, sure. I actually didn't know that was a question. I thought you were still going with more information about the crazy happenings in New Jersey. The short answer is that is an issue that affects any state that legalizes adult use, because you have so many prohibitions about where you can't use. Actually, that's probably the bigger part of the equation. So you can't partake in federal lands, so federal parks, even though it might be quite nice to partake there, you can't do it. Can't be on a public sidewalk. Can't be in federal housing. So the short answer is basically in your home. That's that's where you can consume, or somebody else's home that says private residence that says yes, you can consume here. Short of that, what we will see in New Jersey, and this could be very interesting, is down the road, it looks like there will be consumption lounges. So there are a few consumption lounges in California. There's a couple in Colorado, but essentially what it is, it will be a separate building, or a building that's attached to the dispensary, where people can buy product or actually bring product, go into the consumption lounge, and that's where they can partake. So over time, actually, that may be a great hub of hospitality. I mean, who knows? Maybe you could actually do events there. Maybe it could turn into a mini restaurant. I mean, there could be a lot of nice opportunities, live music, comedy shows. I mean, it could be a lot of fun. So short answer is only the place you can consume is in your home. And then aside from that, be patient, and in about a year, maybe you can go to a consumption lounge right here in Atlantic City and have a good time.
Mhm. And for our panelists that are in other states, I believe that's fairly similar. I know not all states have consumption lounges, but is that true? Is that similar in other states where it's really kind of limited to private property?
Yes, absolutely. That is a very standard thing. I think David has a little insight too about Massachusetts, I believe.
Well, yes. So thank you. We've been asking, I should say politely asking the government when we can open a lounge. I mean, we've opened multiple restaurants, my business partner and I, so that's certainly something that we feel is our strong suit. There are two consumption lounges in Massachusetts, one of which is actually a private club that allows their private club members to consume on site. So they didn't actually receive a proper license from the state. They kind of went around the rules before they were really established, and they've been going for about 3 or 4 years now. So as Rob said, you can't purchase any cannabis there, and they're not connected to a dispensary, but you can bring up to an ounce. So there's other regulations for concentrates, et cetera, and edibles. But our kind of challenge to the government is being able to cook food on site. We want to have a lounge where people can bring their cannabis, but we want to provide restaurant quality food, whether it's casual or not, and it's been very challenging. So right now the rule stands in Massachusetts that the only food you can have in a consumption lounge has to be packaged. It cannot have any cannabis in it whatsoever, cannot be any edibles. So these lounges have pretty kind of stoner food, Twinkies and Snickers and chips and things of the sort. So it still has a long way to go, and Massachusetts has been legal for almost 4 years now. So it's certainly not a fast thing, but we are, I hope, not the standard for how regulation should be rolled out. So hope that other states can learn from us and start, in a better place and be more efficient with their processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amanda, could I share a little bit about California for consumption? So my name is Brian Applegarth. I'm in Northern California. And as far as consumption as it stands now, there's probably about 20 to 30 consumption lounges in the state of different kinds. There's a cafe model that exists in West Hollywood, and then there's a handful of lounges dotted throughout Palm Springs, San Francisco, and beyond. Also, events is a place where people go to consume as well as experience kind of cannabis culture, and the kind of model of events is slowly but surely shifting from kind of the high times version to the more mainstream version. To David's point, people that are seeking out edibles, drinkables, solutions for pets. And I think the one other thing I'd like to mention is, cannabis as a consumption lounge model in California back in the 90s, which is how this kind of happened with cannabis being legalized medically in the US, was really a lounge was really a gathering space for wellness and for people to consume cannabis together and kind of heal. So I think as we innovate cannabis in the lens of adult use or recreational, we should always kind of toggle back and acknowledge that cannabis is really a tool for wellness. And these kind of lounges can also have the personality of bringing people together that are maybe struggling with PTSD or using cannabis in a medically applicable way or wellness-driven way. And it gives them a community to share that experience together and heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking, there was one thing that David touched on a little bit, you know, that some of these have stoner food right now in Massachusetts. And I think that there's a bit of that stereotype that I think some people still have in their heads that aren't so familiar with this industry. So I just was wondering if you guys could tell me, you know, what does the average cannabis consumer actually look like? You know, we know that it's not just people smoking in their basements and not going to work or things like that. And how does that compare to a cannabis motivated traveler, someone who would seek out a tourism experience? Is there a big overlap? Or the people who travel for cannabis tourism experiences, are they a little bit different than the average consumer?
Um,
Go ahead,
Oh,
Cynthia.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Cynthia, you haven't
hi.
spoken yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Well, I didn't chime in the other one because, you know, as you know, I'm here in Texas, and Texas is still not recreational. We're still just dealing with hemp, hence our tour company, Hemp Tours. And it's a really interesting question, Amanda, because a lot of our participants that come to the tour are first time participants in anything having to do with cannabis. And so I feel like it's really important for anybody that's experiencing something for the first time to really, one, have a guide, whether it be a tour guide or a medical person or just somebody that really knows the plant and is able to guide people through everything, you know, from the types of products that they can find to, you know, what dosing would mean, to why even take the plant, you know. And a lot of our participants or tour guests have traveled outside to other states that are legal in recreation. And then when they jump on our tour, they kind of expected the same thing. They're like, oh, yes, you know, finally a tour in Texas. And we're, well, yes, but we're just hemp. So there are people that are willing to travel. We've had a lot of people that have said before, but I would say from our numbers, we've had about 75% that are brand new people that, you know, they're being brought in by their family members, actually, you know, whether it be their sons, their daughters, somebody usually younger that's bringing them on the tour and kind of introducing them in a safe space. So, you know, contrary to popular belief, it's not just a random stoner that wants to jump in and experience this. So it's very important to the type of experience that they get.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can jump in there too with some kind of data points. In 2019, Cultivar Brands Inc., which is my company, partnered with MMGY Travel Intelligence, and we did a national study on who is the cannabis motivated travel audience in the United States. And what we discovered was it equates to about 29% of the active leisure travel audience in the US. 29% of that audience identify or are cannabis motivated travelers, which means they make their travel decisions, destination decisions, itinerary decisions based on the ability to access cannabis related experiences, which when I say cannabis related, that includes hemp massages, CBD massages, visiting a dispensary to Cynthia's point, cannabis 101 education, and maybe not necessarily buying anything, but you know, kind of wanting that education around it. 30% of this audience has never tried cannabis, you know, to Cynthia's point again. So they're really interested in all these wellness and kind of how it improves quality of life. And I really see this as the emerging trend, especially in travel for this audience, which really makes it accessible for destinations and hotels that often have these kind of anti-smoking policies to really start understanding that this audience is different. And when you look at their preferred methods of ingestion while traveling and experiencing cannabis, actually out of 10 different methods of ingestion, the bottom 2 or 4 are vaping and inhalation, with whether it's CBD or THC rich. The ones that scored the highest were edibles, drinkables, and topical applications. So this is the cannabis motivated travel audience. It's 18% of all Americans. And some of the self descriptors that they were really interested in, where they skewed higher than the average US leisure traveler, is they self-identify as foodies to a greater extent, almost 10 points higher than the average. They also are very into nature. There was 2 different nature kind of self-identifiers that ranked really high, as well as they ranked higher than the average leisure traveler as wine enthusiasts. So, and I live in wine country, and I love that data point because sometimes there's this misperception that this isn't the same traveler, and it really is.
Yeah, getting into it sounds like food is very popular. David, can you talk a little bit about the ways that culinary and cannabis come together? Because it's, I know it's
Sure.
not just people with the munchies, this is
Sure.
high-end experience as well.
Yeah, I think so. So a couple of things, and per your last question, it's in my opinion totally expected for those to assume that those are the foods that are going to be at the on-site consumption lounges, because most of the edibles that are in, at least in our market, are what I would call candy. There's no real food experience in hardly any of the edibles. There's no local purveyors in any of the edibles. There's no local farmers. There's very little even organic processes or fair trade. There's really a hole on sourcing, number one, a gap in sourcing. So for us, we've been in I spent 19 years in restaurants. So for example, one of our sorbets in July is going to be an heirloom tomato sorbet from a tomato farmer who's about 4 miles from our facility. So even though that's a limited time offering, we are trying to bring that seasonality to the edible market. So it's a balance of your local food market, the standard of restaurants are. So I moved here from Chicago. Chicago's standard of food is extremely high, even just the casual kind of street food. Coming to Boston, it's a little bit different. Coming to Massachusetts. So not trying to put anyone down, but I think the adventure bug in a lot of people to try new products is just now kind of starting to brew. So for us, we've been talking with the federal government for quite some time, USDA, FDA, about aging cheese in cannabis, about making a cannabis miso. We're trying to find foods for people that are going through autoimmune diseases that can fit into their everyday life. So they're not always eating a piece of candy. They're not always eating sugar with cannabis. They're not always feeling like it's medicine. So for us, it's more of a constant back and forth, trying to understand what's acceptable, what's legal. But for us, it's also just being the thought leaders in the space and really trying to innovate. Cannabis aged cheese, the first batch we did, honestly, it was terrible. It was disgusting, but that's how we learn and that's how we go. However, we have a lot of data points now on where to start for our next batch. So I think in our experience, and we have a dinner series, we cook, all types of events. We're really trying to put together almost a resort, might be a strong word, but almost a cannabis getaway in Western Massachusetts or in Vermont, where to Brian's point, people that want to consume edibles, it's a longer high than inhalation. So we want them to stay at our resort, almost like an old school bed and breakfast, where we would cook for them, we would chat with them, they would have complete, interactions with us, but they also wouldn't have to go anywhere afterwards. They would be able to, be in their room, not have to drive, not have to operate anything. So we're really trying to take a step back and say, yes, there are CPG, items on the market, but trying to kind of open that envelope and see what else we can put into it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other kind of side of that coin is that there's actually a good market for CBD infused food. And actually in New Jersey, that's been more popular for the last couple of years because, of course, we haven't had adult use, and used to be able to go down the street and you'd see coffee shops that had infused coffee. They would have a little, for an extra couple dollars, you could put in 10 milligram shot into your coffee, tea, etc. And so for a lot of people, especially those who don't want to get high, but they do want some of the healing effects, CBD infused dinner can be pretty amazing too. You can make some pretty remarkable foods. Because they have the different terpenes. And when you talk to a chef like Chef David, cooking with cannabis, whether it's CBD or it has THC, it's like having 5 new spices. So you have these new flavors that you can match in with the foods, and you can come up with some pretty remarkable things. Mm-hmm. I worked with a local chef, and we did a series of CBD infused condiments. So we had mustard, ketchup, hot sauce, and barbecue sauce. So we had a big barbecue outdoors, and people could actually enhance their food with the condiments. And we ended up selling those out. But it was a great way to sort of match flavors with something that people are very familiar with. They know how to use the condiments. You had a reliable dose each time. So there are ways to experience infused food on the CBD side, and then also more on the kind of party THC side, I would say. The other thing I would add is at these events, education is so important. So at the very beginning, you have to let the guests know what to expect. Sometimes you have to go over basic definitions. You have to let them know how you made the food, how you dosed it, You have to mark the food, or you really have to be very, very responsible to make sure that people have a good experience when they're having an
Extremely.
infused meal. And if you take your time, you can find out what your level is, what your comfort level is, when it affects your body. Because for some people it takes 30 minutes, some people up to 2 hours, and you have to figure that out over time. So it does take practice, and it takes people who know what they're doing to make a good experience. And I also just want to give a quick shout out to the Stockton students and faculty who showed up. Really appreciate it, you guys. Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Brian. I was gonna say, just to add that real quick, it's a really good point, Rob, because even with just hemp CBD products, lower THC products in cannabis, I mean, the effects are, you are going to feel that. And one of the quick things that we learned quickly in our tours was controlling the samples that we provided to our guests, because a lot of our guests by the end of our tour were very sleepy and they did not want to even, get out of the bus anymore by the time we hit the next restaurant that provided CBD food. So yes, if you are going to provide an experience with food, with edibles, and it is a variety of things, microdosing is going to be key in this point, and explaining that, and also letting the guests know that, hey, if you're going to work with samples, take them home. Journaling effects for everyone is very different. And so providing them just with that guideline of like, hey, let's sit down, like Rob said, let's explain to you, give an education about it, and then have everybody fill out forms. This is how I felt, this is how I feel, this is what I took. And hopefully that reference can help them when they go out to another place, and then they can ask, themselves. So yeah.
It sounds like food's big, and Cynthia, like what you do with education is big. What are some businesses, and maybe Ryan, you can answer this from you said that smoking is of a lower interest, vaping, things like that. Are there any kind of tourism experiences that haven't done so well in other places that interested entrepreneurs in New Jersey should maybe steer clear of and avoid pursuing? What are some hiccups and pitfalls for?
Sure. Well, first off, I'd like to just do a quick response to the foodie discussion and cannabis and food. So right now in California, a lot of the discussion is around cannabis in cuisine and cannabis as an ingredient. California does have a cannabis appellation program that's supposed to roll out in June this year. So it's going by way of wine with terroir, microclimate, type of cultivars that grow well in certain regions. Also, when it comes to the foodie experience, a lot of the the growers and the brain trust that I know, people use cannabis, even the big leaves, in juicing in the morning, because THC in its acid form, which is the form in the plant prior to harvest, is non-psychoactive at all, and the theory is it's extremely anti-inflammatory, like CBD. So there's a lot of things we're discovering, from cannabis leaves as ornamentation to how does it fold in. Also, the gardener, the previous gardener for the French Laundry out of Napa, who grew all their vegetables for this, award-winning restaurant, is now growing cannabis as well as vegetables in Sonoma County. His name's Aaron Kiefer. So that's the kind of talent that this cannabis cuisine is attracting. As far as your question, Amanda, about what to avoid, I'll tell you from the data that the research that we did. Again, this is the national cannabis motivated travel audience. The lowest interest was going on a party bus. It was like we had like 16 activities, and going on a hardcore party bus was the last, it ranked very last on the list, which I think just reasserts that cannabis and hemp and CBD is entering, as we all probably know in this room, a new iteration where it's more mainstream, it's more accessible, there's dosing standards, people understand it more. So yeah, that's what I have to contribute there.
Yeah, Cynthia, David, had you guys seen anything, that also didn't work as well, learned anything as people in this industry so far? It sounds like some of the ideas that we've talked about so far have been successful, but I know it's, it's a whole new industry and a learning process.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Thanks, David. With our end, I think what was pretty challenging at the beginning is choosing the right partners to take and to work with, because even in Texas, within a month in Austin alone, we went from 4 CBD shops to 150 CBD locations, whether it was ice cream partners that serve CBD, to restaurants, to bars, where you can just buy a shot of CBD to add to it. So it was just, you know, an influx. And I feel that it was very simple to take these people, you know, take our guests to just anywhere and find something fun. But the problem was when we were actually focusing on the education portion of it, it's very important to know what education they know and how they are able to provide that education to the consumers, because not everybody knows how to talk about cannabis, or not every employee gets trained, especially when there were no regulations in Texas about anything for a while. It was a very gray area. Everyone was jumping on the bandwagon. People just had employees. And when we went back and actually took a tour, you know, the people talking there were like, yeah, this is what this does. I think, I don't know, maybe. And so that really put a lot of people off, because, you know, as an education company, taking them to a place where people didn't know how to answer, that is something that really, you know, they didn't trust us anymore. It was like, oh, is this snake oil? How can this work if you can't explain it to me? How does this work on everything? So just being able to, you know, properly partner with the right people that focus on the right things, and also watch for their ingredients. You know, one of our core standards is that we make sure that they work with, you know, no artificial ingredients when working with food, because, you know, you're trying to be healthy with your body. So why add other chemicals in it too? So it's a lot work with more of the partners than what we can't control.
I would say, go ahead, Brian. It's something similar, and I wanted to mention, to Brian's point, you know, juicing the raw leaves is something that we've been trying to figure out, because it's, for me, someone with Crohn's disease, extremely beneficial. But the amount of time that products have to sit and go through testing, a lot of that raw product has already been exposed to oxygen and can't really deliver what it was supposed to deliver on point. So that's something we're working on right now. In my experience, at least in Massachusetts, you know, most of the people that reach out to us are, I would say, pseudo-informed, or at least have gone through, you know, we're a few years in, so they're a little deeper into it. I think the edible conversation never changes. Everyone always comes and says, hey, I had a brownie one time, I don't want to eat it again. I said, well, let's back up for a second. You know, one, whoever made that for you probably didn't know what they were doing or how much was in it or what strain it was, and probably didn't walk you through it or coach you through it. So I think to Cynthia's point of education, that always exists. Now, in my experience, in Massachusetts, we get booked for sometimes, you know, weekends in Nantucket or weekends in Martha's Vineyard, where people get together, 10 to 12 people, and they want to have either a cannabis brunch and a cannabis dinner. They want to have kind of a full out experience. So it's kind of a hybrid of what we're discussing. You know, it's tourism, but it's private, so that they can kind of control their experience, put you know, pump the brakes if they need to, or kind of open it up a little more if they want. So I think for us, you know, I saw a few people trying party buses last year, didn't really do too well. I think most people don't want to be in motion while they're trying something new and not sure how they're going to feel. So that was certainly, I'm on board with Brian's statement. I think what we've seen is a lot more people want kind of these outdoor cannabis experiences. They want beachfront dinners. They want farm dinners. They want to be out in nature. I think there's a calming aspect of simply just getting away from humans if they're consuming cannabis, and really being able to focus, surround themselves with people that they trust, they know, care about them. And we help to provide that kind of same trust and education through our food. So that's predominantly what we've found.
Mm-hmm.
And Amanda, I'd actually like to take the sort of opposite sort of your question. You asked what things kind of don't work. I know we probably have a bunch of entrepreneurs here, especially since the doors have just opened for adult use in New Jersey. So I just wanted to briefly mention 3 things that I've seen work in other states that have kind of a low entry point, a low investment point, and things that people can make a real run at. So the first one I would say is, if we have anybody here who's a trained yoga expert, yoga and cannabis classes, private yoga and cannabis classes are quite popular. It doesn't take a lot because you already have a studio. You'll definitely get your audience if you're quite good and you can help with education. So I would say that's one thing to look at. Another one, and I've seen this in Colorado, it's very popular, is there's actually a limo service. And so of course you have limo services that go to the airport all the time. Well, this one specialized in cannabis education and partnerships. And so what they would do is they would pick up someone from the airport. They would explain what the regulations were in the state. what kind of products you could get, what the dosage was, where you could consume all those things. They would take them to a dispensary. They would go in and buy their product. And then they would take them either as a part of a tour. They might tour a grow facility. They might go to a class. But anyway, sort of transportation and education, you could definitely combine those as well. And then the other thing that I'd like to mention is, of course, Atlantic City, the casinos have such a big challenge. Their audience has been really downtrending. And of course, I know they're going to be struggling with what do we do with this? Do we want this in the casinos? Is it kind of slow down play? Do we have to do smoking rooms, all that? I would think to start, and I've seen this a little bit in Colorado, is that some of their small casinos made partnerships with the dispensaries. So they actually didn't offer anything other than education and coupons, basically. So if you went into a cannabis-friendly room, they did have some where you could smoke, but then they also had a little welcome basket, and the welcome basket was information again about what products, how they worked. There was a discount coupon to a local dispensary, and so people could go there and buy their products and then possibly consume them in their rooms. So I just wanted to point out a couple areas where if you're creative in the cannabis hospitality and tourism space, and you're good and passionate about things that people want to do anyway, you can often add cannabis to it and make it run.
Mm-hmm. Rob, you mentioned the casinos, and interestingly enough, Atlantic City already has 2 medical dispensaries on the boardwalk very close to each other, one that's open, one that's still pending to be open. But, you know, in theory, these will be the first places likely that can switch to adult use and begin sales. It's probably going to be very attractive to people. But do you, and Rob, you're in Stockton a lot, so you're kind of in the area of Atlantic City. Do you think that this is going to change the boardwalk atmosphere? You mentioned some of these possible partnerships between casinos, but I think that might be even a concern for some people, that because there's already this here, it's suddenly going to become very cannabis central, when in reality there's lots of different industries kind of going on the Atlantic City boardwalk.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I would defer to one of my colleagues here, who's also a professor in cannabis at Stockton, Tom Ola, who I see in the crowd, and maybe he wants to put something in the chat, because actually that's his background and experience with casinos. But to your point, I understand why people are apprehensive or a little bit scared. It happens in every adult use market. I mean, you see the photos of day one opens up, and there is a line. There's a line 4 blocks long. People are out there for hours and hours, and of course, the people in the neighborhood are thinking, "Is this what it's going to be like?" Well, it's not. I mean, things kind of normalize pretty quickly. So if you go to Massachusetts now, you go to Colorado, you go to California, I mean, they're just places of business, and there's so many security cameras and everything else, and people don't really loiter. There's not things that go on, so it's a very quick process. But I do understand how it's new to the area, and so there would be some concerns about how this is all going to play out. But what I would say is, for the businesses to try to be a little patient, to try to learn about it as much as you can, maybe even try to lean into it a little bit, and things will kind of normalize pretty quickly. And eventually, I bet it will help Atlantic City tourism. The people want to go there, and eventually you'll go to a concert again, you'll get a fine meal, you can have some cannabis, but it'll take a while, and I can understand at first that it will probably be a little bumpy.
Yeah. Brian, have you seen in other markets that happen where there's kind of this big rush and then things start to blend together a little bit more as they would with the cannabis industry trying to blend more in?
Yeah. There's like that honeymoon phase, right? Like there's these benchmarks where there's this fad and there's these peaks in the trajectory of cannabis kind of normalization, and that includes reducing stigma and just how it lives in our society in general. So yeah, there's absolutely that happens. From the tourism and travel lens, which is where I really come from, you know, when it comes to partnerships, to Cynthia's point, partnerships are really important, especially for destinations that have brands and strategic plans and core pillars, and having a dispensary solution specifically of somebody that you know is compliant, that operates well, and that also has had some hospitality training and understands the destination and understands the needs of hotels and the DMO. I think having that specific partner, that's kind of what our company offers with Cultivar Brands, is making sure that there's this hospitality experience for the destination that's cohesive. So I do not think that all retailers are equal when it comes to travel. I think that you have to pick the right partners that are going to service the cannabis motivated travel audience, and they need to know what that means, because it's very different than the avid weekly, daily user, which does quite honestly account for a lot of, you know, this initial customer profile. But that's quickly changing, and that's where travel is going to continue to grow in that direction. So having really steady partnerships where you know that, and a lot of it's in the name of risk mitigation. You want to know that you're sending your guests and your visitors to a place that is a good operator and that is going to give a service that reflects well on the destination.
Mhm. Now, there's getting into this just a little bit more, maybe some of the partnerships touches on this. There's lots of existing businesses, and David, you know, were a chef in restaurants before this, but what are, and maybe that's one of the ways in, how maybe there's some of these existing businesses that are interested in becoming involved. Maybe, you know, they don't want to be plant touching because there's so many regulations surrounding that, but what are some of the good entries into this for existing businesses who want to have some?
Sure. I mean, the retail perspective is always really positive. I think if your focus is education and really digging deep with consumers and really listening to their pain points and why they're coming, you know, to possibly purchase some products, having a retail front, you know, you don't have to produce any products, you don't have to manufacture anything. You can just showcase local products. I think that's something that we really appreciate, because a lot of all of the original medical dispensaries had to be vertically integrated, so they were all producing their own products. Now it's diversifying a little bit, but that's kind of an internal discussion, you know, among each business. So I would say retail is really strong. I have been working on trying to convince all of my chef friends that are out of work during COVID to come into the edible industry, because majority, in again, this is just my opinion, but I've consume quite a bit daily and talk to lots of people about edibles all the time and cook lots of dinners. Majority of the people producing edibles in the state of Massachusetts have zero food background. I mean, if any, they might have worked in one restaurant at some point, and even then they probably weren't necessarily in food production. So I think the manufacturing licenses for any food professionals or hospitality professionals are a good point, but we're starting to see independent delivery companies come about and really start to deliver direct to consumer. And that's another side of customer service that just hasn't existed, because a lot of our customers aren't necessarily the end users. We have 40 and 50-year-olds that are looking to purchase products for their parents. So it's growing in the delivery method, but I think ultimately what's lacking is really kind of Brian's point, the hospitality kind of customer service side of things. There's really a need for stronger, doesn't necessarily have to be third party, but it seems that most experts are trying to come in just from consulting, helping guide people into what the right products are to buy, what the right basis are for them. So it's kind of these intangible middle pieces that we see growing right now that I think would be kind of an easy access, or at least initial entrance into the market.
And Cynthia, how did you kind of get in? This agritourism is very different than the people, you know, are more likely to think of food when they travel, maybe than agritourism at first. How did you get involved, and what do you see in this, how other people could be involved?
Definitely. I mean, I got involved just because I've been a cannabis enthusiast for a very long time, and I've traveled around a lot, and so I saw the plant outside of as a drug. You know, I've seen it used as both medical and holistic, and for, you know, cultural experiences, because this plant has been around for a very long time, and it's been used very diverse in a bunch of different areas of the world in different ways. And so that, you know, coming into Texas or moving to Austin, I met my best friend Leah, who's also the co-founder of Hemp Tours, and both of us we're kind of in a spot where we come from very different backgrounds. You know, I come from teaching, that's my background. She's coming from business, helping businesses, small businesses grow and things like that. And so we really were trying to find a niche, you know, because everybody wanted to open up a shop. Everybody wanted to just sell these products because they thought what was going to happen, like Rob said, you know, the first day it's open, there's a line across the door, you know, that's going to be there. And that's what everybody thinks. Oh, I'm going to just put up a shop, open it, and that's it. But a lot of people forget that consumer adoption is not there yet. You know, there's still a lot of consumers that they're scared of it. That stigma is still there. So putting our strengths into something, that's when we started thinking about the education portion of it first. And then when we went around to different parts of the country and went on tours ourselves, we noticed that there was a lack of education in tours. That's why, you know, I can see why a party bus is not the first choice, because you're probably not going to get an educational experience there, you know. And when we had our first party bus as well, it was kind of funny because half of the people in it were really wanting to party and wanted something other than hemp. And then we had other people, half of the people that did not want that at all. And so trying to find that balance. So getting into how we, you know, how to choose and how other people are getting involved, it's really trying to find out, okay, what is it that I already know? What are my strengths? And how can I put that into cannabis? So, you know, that suggestion that David said, you know, telling all of your chef's friends, come over. There's a lot of businesses that have giant space, you know, they just have a lot of space to offer. And we ourselves went over and said, hey, can we create an event here? You know, we designed an educational event within a giant space. And so that's another thing too. If you have these spaces available, whether it's outdoors, indoors, then, you know, just having the space alone can be very valuable, because not everybody allows for certain things to happen, especially with cannabis. So there are a lot of places that we would want to, you know, hey, can we take our participants here just for lunch? Nothing to do with cannabis, just a place to stop. And they're like, oh, but you're a tour about cannabis and hemp. No, no, no. So they didn't even want us to stop in that sense. So, you know, keeping your mind open and just allowing those experiences to happen in your location already can be a great opportunity as well.
We're running a little short on time, and I want to get to some of the questions in the chat. So this is the last question that I have for you all, but just people that are thinking about entering the industry for the first time, what should they be thinking about, you know, as we're in this limbo period before we really have legal sales started? And what do towns need to be thinking about as well as they're kind of eyeing this big change?
The thing I would say, especially as a cannabis professor, is you definitely need a baseline of cannabis knowledge. And you can get that through continuing ed departments, you can get it through books, videos, all kinds of things, but you at least need to know enough about the plant so that you are an educated participant. So I would say that's the baseline that you have to start with. And then the other thing is, I think the big thing is you really have to look at what you're good at and what you're passionate at and what you're and where you want to go, and then figure out how that fits with cannabis, because there are transferable skills from almost any job you can think of. I mean, the number of jobs in cannabis now is just amazing. There was a report that just came out, and we now have 311,000 full-time jobs, and that in the cannabis industry across the country. And that doesn't even count some of the support industries like website design and freelancers who work there. So, I mean, it's one of the biggest markets ever. So I can see why people are very interested, but you definitely have to be educated is the first thing, and then you have to figure out what your skills are and how you can make those pivot into the industry. As far as the towns, I mean, the big thing is the most public display is if you have a dispensary, because then you will have traffic coming in and out. If a town opts for a cultivation center or a processing center, those are so security heavy and discreet, and they're usually brick buildings or big steel buildings. You can't tell what's in them. They look like any other building in town. So I would say if you heard municipality and you're a little worried about your perception in the public, you're still worried about stigma, at least look at a lab and look at a cultivation center, because those things, again, they're very private, they're discreet, they'll bring in tax revenue for you, and then perhaps later on you can maybe start looking at a dispensary.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. So totally agree with Rob. It's education is like first and foremost, and that's understanding hemp, that's understanding CBD, that's understanding cannabis. It's kind of like a 101 course just to kind of get spun up. And in truth, that's exactly what the cannabis industry stakeholders need too for hospitality. They need to understand what kind of that industry needs. Again, I come at this from a travel, tourism, and hospitality perspective. Also, part of that education is research and data and knowing who your audience is or what subsegment of that audience you want to target, whether it's a canna curious traveler or whether it's an avid cannabis traveler or one of the other two kind of subcategories. Also, the next step is a basic risk mitigation plan, whether it's destination wide or for hotels or attractions or other. And this risk mitigation plan is basically not just for your visitors, but also for your staff. You know, some things that I've seen in California, we're in our 4th year of legalization, of adult use legalization. It's been medically legal since 1996. And some of the things that I saw was, you know, unnecessary ambulance trips, people picking up people at hotels that took too high of an edible. And those people usually stayed in their hotel room and had to cancel plans and ruin their trip a little bit. Also, you have delivery services coming, they're just coming onto the hotel, not knowing where to park or how to drop off a delivery at a hotel. They're not on brand as far as uniform. And so the lack of coordination starts, these gaps start become more and more obvious. And there was one client where their frontline staff was actually recommending an underground delivery, which means no non-tested products. I mean, the risk and liability there is exponential and unknown, and it's easily fixable. So a basic risk mitigation plan to protect your staff and visitors, that's kind of the first phase: education, data, risk mitigation from a destination and hotel perspective.
Credibility.
I was going to jump in and say something maybe slightly different. I agree with both, you know, what Rob and Brian said. I was going to say that for people that are coming into the industry, really understand that you're gonna have to develop a new realm of patience. Patience as in within yourself for dealing with the government, because a lot of the people that are issuing the licenses and working through this, they are learning at the same time as everyone else. It's not necessarily something that they've spent a lot of time in. So a lot of the regulations, at least in Massachusetts, you know, from a food professional standpoint, we're teaching them on what to look for in our actual the kitchen side of what we're doing. So it's been a very long process that requires a considerable amount of patience, more than I was prepared to give to this process, having opened restaurants in the past. And I would say that the second thing that people should really expect is there really needs to be a larger requirement for social justice. There needs to be a larger requirement for what we should be contributing. There should be a significantly different requirement for giving back to local communities. I think it's often a lofty subject that a lot of people don't really drill down on. We've been pushing our local government to require every cannabis license holder to donate a portion of their quarterly profits to public defenders to help get nonviolent cannabis offenders out of prison. So I really think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But the biggest point is that most of the people that are advocating for this are minorities, and a lot of people that are not minorities need to speak up and make sure that the new industries that are starting, the new states that are coming on board, need to start on the right foot and go in the right direction.
I definitely was going to add that, like David said, you know, look for the advocacy programs that are in your city, within your state, you know, partner, see what's out there, see what's going on, because that's something that, you know, we didn't realize that we've had, well, in Texas, I say we, a lot of the people in Texas didn't realize that there was an actual medical marijuana program, you know, and even though it's very limited in THC, the program still exists, yet nobody knows. So, you know, yeah, do your research about the plant and about cannabis, but also it's very important to see what is already there in your state, who's already fighting for it, who's already knows the important players, because that's really going to help pave the way into expanding this, you know, unless some certain laws change and unless certain people that have been affected by this, especially people that have been arrested, you know, there's a lot of groups that are working on this right now, a lot of lawyers that are getting together. So getting a good cannabis lawyer is great, because not every lawyer knows about it. So that's also a really important thing to remember.
All right. We're going to go to Jane before we do some questions in the chat.
Yes, just to give everybody a few minutes to get their last minute questions in the chat, I wanted to take this moment to inform you all that Stockton has been a leader in education about cannabis, and we have a 6-course certificate that you can get that's fully online, and the link is in the chat if you'd like more information on that. And we also, as we said in the beginning, have a cannabis studies minor. So I wanted to announce that while you're putting your questions into the chat. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have.
And Jane, I also wanted to mention, and this goes to David's point, that with our minor, we're actually developing a couple new classes that we're going to be offering. And I'm very proud to say that right now I'm actually working on a social justice and cannabis class, and that will become part of our regular curriculum. And then probably within another 6 months to a year, depending on how fast I work, we'll have an integrated cannabis media class as well. So we have some things on the move, but especially proud that we are going to be talking about social justice and cannabis.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
Okay, I think we might have time for like 2 questions from here. So here's just one that I'm seeing from Michael Bussler. He's wondering about the pricing of product and what do you anticipate will be the effect on the illegal market? Has anyone seen that in different states and can?
We've certainly seen that here. I think the what we call the legacy market here will never go away. It'll change and morph and move into different sectors. I think something that's very challenging for a lot of people is to understand concentrates and understand what rosin and resin and bubble hash and water hash and all these things are. For someone like me, you know, I've gone off all synthetic medications to use cannabis full time. So I actually use concentrates quite a bit. The concentrate market is something that exists completely underground. There are literal, you know, underground competition. So that will never change. The people that are coming into the regulatory market that are hash makers are focused on concentrate. I think the price is very high in their eyes in dispensaries. There's a lot of tax that goes into these products. So I would say that the legacy market will never go away. Dispensaries are expensive, and that's one main reason why that market will never go away, because what you can pay for and what the relationships that people have, you know, that have built over time, they can get the same products almost better for considerably less money. So money is certainly a massive part of this industry of really finding price point sensitive items that are available in dispensaries.
Mm-hmm. And right now in New Jersey, if anyone, you know, isn't aware of this, isn't that familiar with the medical program, the prices are very high, some of the highest in the country, if not the highest at times, averages $350 to $500 an ounce is maybe around the last time that I reported that. I've heard of people paying more than $600 for certain ones. So, you know, that right now cannot compete with what's happening on the underground market in New Jersey in the legacy market.
Excuse me, Amanda, but that is why people come into Massachusetts to buy products. That's why people come here to find those. That's the entire, it's going to continue until those start to drop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, between the regulated market and underground market, there will always be tension. Underground market will always win on price. Sometimes it can even win on quality. But for some people, the bigger thing is they don't want to break any laws, first of all. Other thing is, you know that the product there is tested. You know what the potency is. You know what you're getting. So especially if you're a medical patient, you find something that works, I know you want to stick with it. And then also more variety. That there's more products in the dispensary usually than what you get in the legacy market. But yeah, there'll always be that kind of tension between those two entities.
And Rob, just to continue what you just said, variety is a big part. The different cultivars that you're going to continually be able to find. A lot of that THC component was bred up being kind of a underground market or legacy market. And now it's course correcting where you're having more balanced strains, just like you have a non-alcoholic beer all the way up to a highly alcoholic over 20% beer. Cannabis is going to have that same spectrum of dosing when it comes to THC count, where you can really select and know what you're getting. And about the testing tier, in California, the cannabis testing tier is parts per billion, of which basically an apple in Whole Foods wouldn't pass that test. So the safety level of purchasing from a licensed retailer is an important message for as this legalization, the adult use market grows in New Jersey. I would recommend that New Jersey embrace that messaging and communication strategy for consumers to let them know why it's safe to buy and what that means.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I guess we're just about out of time. Thank you to all the panelists. I think this was a really informative and great discussion.
Okay, well, I'm Jane Buckenevich, and I'm the Institute Coordinator for Light. And on behalf of Light and the School of Business at Stockton, I'd just like to thank the panelists. What a fantastic panel. If we could give you a round of applause, it would be wonderful, because you all did a fantastic job. Thank you for sharing your insight with us. Thank you to the audience. And we will be sending an exit survey at the end of the panel. So if you would please fill that out, we would appreciate it. And we're going to be distributing links to the recorded session. So thank you, everyone.
You.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This has been a great session. What I got out of this, from a chamber perspective, that typically has a neutral perspective, position on this, is the education is critical. Every one of you said educate, 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 and you probably never get enough of that. And with Stockton doing everything that they're doing to educate the community and your tourism industry and how important this is going to be, getting this off the ground and getting that education platform built is going to be critical, not only it's really for the safe and responsible business operations for this new industry that we're going to have here in New Jersey. So kudos to the panelists, and Amanda and Jay.com, always outstanding. So thank you all for joining us. Any final comments from any of the panelists? Anything you want to leave us with before we scoot?
Just wanted to thank everybody for attending, and again, especially my students and my Stockton colleagues. Go Ospreys.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Same. Thank you. What an honor. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jane. You and your team at Light are fantastic. Appreciate it. Good
Thank
night.
you, Michael.
You got it, everybody. Take care. Be well. Wash your hands.
This event is presented by the Lloyd D. Levinson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality, and Tourism, School of Business, Stockton University, in partnership with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber and Stockton University Cannabis Studies Program.